On the morning of February 26, 2025, maintenance and security workers arrived at a gated property in the hills outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, and could not reach anyone inside. Calls had gone unanswered for days. When they finally alerted police and deputies made their way onto the grounds, they found something that would dominate national headlines for weeks. The bodies of Gene Hackman, the 95-year-old two-time Academy Award-winning actor, and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, 65, a classical pianist, inside their home. One of the couple's 3 dogs was also found dead. 2 others were alive. What followed was not a quiet, quickly closed case. It was a month-long investigation involving the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, the New Mexico Office of the Medical Investigator, the State Health Department, and because of how the deaths initially looked, a wide net of forensic and toxicology testing that left the public and much of the entertainment press waiting for answers. There was no FBI takeover, no hidden tunnel, and no laptop full of buried government secrets. What there was instead was something arguably more unsettling in its own quiet way. 2 people who died alone in their home, days apart, without anyone noticing, and a piece of digital evidence, Betsy Arakawa's internet search history, that gave investigators a fragile, aching window into her final hours. This is the real story of what happened at the Hackman estate, built entirely from the official investigative record, the medical examiner's findings, and reporting from outlets who review the released case files. Gene Hackman retired from acting in 2004, walking away from Hollywood at the height of his reputation after a career that included The French Connection, Unforgiven, The Conversation, and Enemy of the State. He and Arakawa, who had been together since the 1980s and married in 1991, settled into a secluded property in a gated community outside Santa Fe. Neighbors and locals who spoke to reporters in the aftermath of the deaths described the couple as intensely private but not reclusive in any sinister sense. They were simply 2 people, one very famous and one not, who had built a quiet life away from cameras. The home sat on a piece of land typical of the high desert hills around Santa Fe, pinyon and juniper scrub, dry air, and the kind of rural isolation that comes standard outside a small southwestern city rather than from any deliberate fortress building. It was gated, as many properties in that community are, but nothing about the estate's design or history suggested it was constructed for secrecy beyond the ordinary privacy any wealthy, famous retiree might want. When deputies entered the home on February 26th, they found Hackman's body near the kitchen, close to the front door. Arakawa was found in a bathroom, with one of the couple's dogs, a German Shepherd, positioned near her in what one deputy described in body camera footage as a protective, guarding posture. A second dog was found dead in a crate in a bathroom closet. The state veterinary lab later attributed that dog's death to dehydration and starvation, having apparently been left without care once its owners could no longer tend to it. 2 other dogs were found alive on the property. Investigators walked through the home looking for anything that might explain what had happened. Body camera footage, later released to the public after a court fight over the family's privacy, showed officers moving room to room. They found the couple's extensive art collection undisturbed, cash still sitting inside the home, and no signs of forced entry anywhere on the property. Prescription medications were logged from the bathroom counter as part of the routine documentation of a death investigation. Nothing about the physical state of the house suggested robbery, struggle, or intrusion. Because the state of the bodies made it impossible to immediately determine how long the couple had been dead, and because 2 people, one of them one of the most recognizable actors of his generation, had died under circumstances nobody could explain, investigators treated the scene with the seriousness that any unexplained double death warrants. Gas lines were checked. Carbon monoxide levels were tested. The home's electrical and heating systems were inspected. Detectives requested phone records, banking activity, medical histories, and a forensic review of the computers and devices inside the home. This is standard procedure in any death investigation where the cause is not immediately obvious, not evidence of a hidden agenda, but the ordinary, methodical process of ruling things out one by one. The early theories in the press ranged from carbon monoxide poisoning to foul play, largely because so little was known in the first days. New Mexico Gas Company inspectors did identify several safety concerns, described as red tags, on the property, but the sheriff's office stated these were not believed to be a factor in the deaths. Both Hackman and Arakawa tested negative for carbon monoxide poisoning. There were no signs of external or internal trauma on either body, according to the state's chief medical investigator, Dr. Heather Jarrell. Roughly a week after the discovery, at a press conference that finally answered the question the country had been asking, Dr. Jarrell announced the causes of death. Betsy Arakawa had died of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare but serious respiratory illness spread primarily through exposure to the droppings, urine, or nesting materials of infected rodents, most commonly deer mice in the American Southwest. Gene Hackman had died of hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiac disease, with Alzheimer's disease listed as a significant contributing factor. Investigators determined that Arakawa had died first, likely around February 11th or 12th, and that Hackman died several days later, around February 18th, a date investigators were able to pin down using data recovered from his pacemaker. Hantavirus infections are rare in humans, but they carry a startlingly high fatality rate once symptoms progress. New Mexico's state veterinarian told reporters that the specific hantavirus strain found in the Southwest has a mortality rate estimated between 38 and 50%, and that in the previous 50 years, the state had recorded roughly 136 confirmed cases. The illness typically begins with flu-like symptoms, fever, muscle aches, fatigue, that can last several days before rapidly progressing to fluid buildup in and around the lungs. Once that respiratory phase begins, a person can die within 24 to 48 hours without immediate medical treatment. Dr. Jarrell noted during the press conference that it would not be unusual for someone in that stage of the illness to collapse suddenly, which appeared consistent with the position in which Arakawa was found. A subsequent environmental assessment of the property by the New Mexico Department of Health found rodent droppings, nests, and dead rodents scattered across several outbuildings on the estate, sheds, a garage, and other structures separate from the main house. Officials were clear that no signs of active rodent infestation were found inside the couple's primary residence itself, which made the exact point of exposure difficult to pin down with certainty, though the presence of infected rodent activity on the wider property was consistent with a hantavirus diagnosis. As for Hackman, the medical examiner's findings painted a quietly devastating picture. He was 95 years old, had advanced Alzheimer's disease, and had underlying heart disease that had likely been present for some time. There was no food found in his stomach, indicating he had not eaten in the period before his death, though the medical examiner did not find clear evidence of dehydration. When asked directly whether Hackman would have known that his wife had died before he himself passed away days later, Dr. Jarrell gave an answer that struck many as the most quietly tragic detail of the entire case. Given the advanced state of his Alzheimer's, it was genuinely possible that he did not know she was gone. Sheriff Adam Mendoza added that investigators found no indication that a caretaker had been present at the home in that final stretch. This is the part of the story that connects most directly to the idea of a laptop containing significant findings, though the reality, once the investigative report was released to the public in April 2025, turned out to be something far more human and far less conspiratorial than early speculation suggested. Investigators did review the couple's computers and devices as a routine part of the investigation, and what they found on Betsy Arakawa's computer offered a detailed, almost minute-by-minute record of her final days. Between February 8th and the morning of February 12th, records showed she had been actively searching for information related to flu-like symptoms, breathing techniques, and conditions resembling COVID-19. Investigators also obtained call logs showing that on the morning of February 11th, Arakawa made 3 calls to a Santa Fe medical concierge service called Cloudberry Health. According to Cloudberry's founder, who later spoke to reporters, Arakawa had reached out a couple of weeks earlier to ask about scheduling an echocardiogram for her husband, and had also set up an appointment for herself, unrelated to any respiratory concerns, for February 12th. 2 days before that appointment, she called to cancel it, explaining that her husband wasn't feeling well. Then, on the morning of February 12th, what would turn out to be close to the last day she was known to be alive, she called again, this time asking about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a treatment involving breathing pure oxygen in a pressurized chamber. The Cloudberry founder told reporters that Arakawa did not indicate she was in respiratory distress during that call, though she did mention feeling congested. Surveillance footage from stores Arakawa visited on February 11th, along with her email activity, helped investigators establish that she was still alive and functioning independently on that date, giving them a critical anchor point for the broader timeline. Taken together, her internet searches, her phone calls to the medical service, and the store surveillance footage let investigators reconstruct a woman who appeared to sense something was wrong with her health, congestion, flu-like symptoms, but who, by all available evidence, had no idea she was dealing with a disease as fast-moving and dangerous as hantavirus, and who was also trying to arrange medical care for her husband at the same time she was quietly unwell herself. That is the laptop at the center of this case, not a hidden trove of classified secrets, but a browser history that reads like the last ordinary worried actions of someone trying to figure out why she felt sick, without any way of knowing how little time she had left. 4 weeks after the deaths, almost none of this was public. The investigation files, body camera footage, autopsy reports, and photographs from inside the home were sealed while attorneys for the Hackman estate fought to keep them that way. Kurt Sommer, an attorney representing the estate, argued in court that Hackman and Arakawa had spent their lives deliberately avoiding public attention and that this right to privacy should extend to their estate after death, particularly regarding sensitive images from inside their home and of their bodies. The Santa Fe District Court Judge, Matthew Wilson, ultimately issued a ruling that split the difference. He denied the estate's request to block the release of the investigative materials altogether, noting that under New Mexico law, investigation records are generally considered public. However, he ordered that no images depicting either Hackman's or Arakawa's bodies could be released, and that photos or video of their deceased dog also be excluded or obscured. That ruling cleared the way for the eventual release of the body camera footage, the written investigative report, and select photographs from inside the home, all shown with the required redactions. When that footage and reporting became public in mid-April 2025, it confirmed the picture investigators had been building for weeks. Two elderly, extremely private people, one suffering from an aggressive rodent-borne illness she likely never identified in time, the other in advanced cognitive decline and failing physically on his own, dying days apart in a large home with no one else present to notice. It's worth asking honestly why this case generated the kind of speculation it did, including theories about hidden rooms, federal cover-ups, and secret archives, none of which were ever part of the actual investigation. Part of the answer is simply Hackman's fame. He was one of the most respected actors of his generation, and any mysterious circumstances surrounding a beloved public figure's death tend to generate rumor faster than official statements can catch up. Part of it is the genuinely strange and tragic shape of the actual facts. A dog dead of starvation in a closet. A wife who appears to have died first, alone, while her husband, deep in Alzheimer's, may not have understood what had happened and continued living in the house for roughly a week before he too died. A property secluded enough that no one noticed anything was wrong until maintenance workers showed up. These are the kinds of details that feel like they belong in fiction, and it's understandable that in the information vacuum of the first days, before the medical examiner's findings were public, speculation filled the gap with much darker explanations than the truth eventually provided. And part of it is simply how investigations like this actually work. Anytime law enforcement responds to an unexplained death, especially a public figure's, the process looks methodical and exhaustive from the outside. Forensic sweeps of the property, device and phone record reviews, toxicology testing, environmental assessments. To someone unfamiliar with standard procedure, that level of scrutiny can look like evidence that something sinister is being hidden. In this case, it was evidence of the opposite. Investigators doing the careful, unglamorous work required to rule out foul play and arrive at an accurate, if devastating, natural explanation. Strip away the speculation, and what remains is not a conspiracy. It's the story of two people who spent decades building a quiet, private life together, and who died within about a week of each other from entirely unrelated natural causes, a coincidence of timing made almost unbearable by the isolation of their home and the advanced state of Hackman's illness. Betsy Arakawa appears to have contracted hantavirus, likely through exposure somewhere on their rural property, and died rapidly once the disease reached its respiratory phase, despite trying in her final days to figure out what was wrong with her and to get help for her husband at the same time. Gene Hackman, already in advanced Alzheimer's and living with serious heart disease, may never have known she was gone and died alone in the same house roughly a week later. The laptop investigators pulled evidence from wasn't a hidden archive of classified secrets sitting beneath a locked library. It was Betsy Arakawa's ordinary internet search history, the kind almost anyone might leave behind. Symptoms, breathing exercises, a worried afternoon spent trying to understand what was happening to her own body. Investigators used it, along with phone records and store surveillance footage, to build a timeline precise enough to answer the central question everyone had been asking. Not who was responsible, because no one was, but simply what happened and when. The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office and the New Mexico Office of the Medical Investigator closed the case as two deaths from natural causes: cardiac disease complicated by Alzheimer's for Hackman and hantavirus pulmonary syndrome for Arakawa. No criminal investigation followed. No federal agency took over the case. The FBI was never confirmed to have played any role in the investigation at all. What actually happened inside that house in the hills outside Santa Fe was sadder and simpler than any of the theories that spread in the weeks before the truth came out. Two people, together for nearly 40 years, who spent their final days doing what anyone might do when something feels wrong, searching for answers, reaching out for help, and running out of time before they could find it.